Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the next installment of Where We're Going. This is an opportunity to explore different themes throughout the year, focusing on where we are at this particular point in history. My name is Dolly Duffy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Notre Dame Alumni Association. In our first week, many of you know we explored some of the work that is happening at the Keough School of Global Affairs and the College of Science, as well as the Mendoza College of Business. Last week, we heard from Michael Camilleri from the Inter-American Dialogue and Tara Kenny, a faith-based impact investor at TCK Global Advisors and a dear friend of mine. I left both meetings, the first meeting, but I know you left the second meeting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there, but full of excitement and hope for the future and everything that we are building together. Now today, we're going to continue to explore the concept of what it means to be a global citizen, how we define it for ourselves, and how we live it. And today, we'll focus on the global viewpoint, and our guest speakers will be tuning in from all around the world. We hope that you'll find this very insightful and incredibly engaging. We ask that if you have questions for our faculty, please use the Google form that we're sharing with you now. This will allow us to facilitate questions effectively, efficiently, because our goal is to get as many of your questions answered as possible, given the time constraints. And now I'd like to welcome back Ray Offenheiser, a member of the Notre Dame class of 1971. Ray is the William J. Pulte Director of the Pulte Institute for Global Development and an Associate Professor of the Practice in the Keough School of Global Affairs. And that may actually be one of the longest titles in all of history. Ray, I had to practice it. He teaches graduate and undergraduate students, where he leads a course on the foundations of sustainable development. Prior to returning to Notre Dame in 2017, Ray was the president of Oxfam America, a Boston-based international relief and development agency. He did this for more than 20 years. His research interests and areas of expertise include poverty alleviation, human rights, US foreign policy, and international development. He's been a frequent commentator with the US and international media on these and very many other topics. Ray's going to moderate today's discussion, but before I turn it over to him, I'd like to ask, Ray, you've been a practitioner and worked in global development all over the world. Recently, you gave a talk at Cornell where you outlined 5 areas that are fundamental to human existence and experiencing the greatest challenges of our times. These are taming technology for the workforce, mitigating climate change, managing the migration of people, feeding 9 billion people by 2050, and values. Those are huge topics. And of these 5, which of them are being addressed as part of your work at the Pulte Institute?
Thanks, Dolly. A really stimulating and big question, and I'm going to try to answer it somewhat succinctly. Maybe quickly just say a little bit about the Pulte Institute. The Pulte Institute was really founded with the idea that we should be sort of a catalytic entity working across the campus to stimulate actually faculty from schools and departments across the university to work on important global topics like the ones that you just cited. And so in some sense, we've been a convener, or we're intended to be a convener for precisely that kind of work. And maybe just as a way of answering your question, the simple answer might be that we're trying to address all of those in some fashion or other. And maybe the best way to answer the question is give some examples of the kinds of things we're doing that are simple and straightforward and we'll touch on, I think, maybe each one of the different topics that you mentioned. For example, we're currently conducting a major review of the impacts of a decade of agricultural investment in Bangladesh. We're collaborating with faculty in the Keough Institute, looking at the role of the church in addressing mass migration or climate-induced mass migration of African and Asian refugees to Italy. With support from the BHP Billiton Corporation, a major global mining company, we're undertaking research on the impacts of climate change on water scarcity and the impacts of climate change on water scarcity globally, and how water will have to be governed in the 21st century, and water distribution and access would have to be governed. We've launched a major initiative focused on the disruptive impacts of artificial intelligence and automation on US labor markets, and what appropriate policy responses should be to those impacts. And we're also doing a major bit of work with USAID in Haiti, looking at how the Catholic education school system can actually strengthen overall education for primary school students throughout the country of Haiti, where the public school system is quite weak and the Catholic system is quite strong. And on values, I think I want to harken back a little bit to what Dean Appleby said in our opening session, where all our work in the Pulte and Keough School more generally are guided by the notion of integral human development, which, as Dean Appleby described in our first session, focuses on ensuring dignity and development of all peoples, especially the less fortunate. So all our scholarship and research at the Pulte Institute is guided by the core principles of Catholic social teaching, which we transmit to students through both their coursework, experiential research, and experiences with us. And at the core of what we're concerned with at the Pulte Institute are poverty, inequality, and sustainability. And I think you would agree that each one of those topics, those research topics that I mentioned to you that involve field work of our staff, would touch on each and every one of those. So let me now turn to the panelists and introduce them to you. Throughout my career, I've had the great privilege, and I think it's one of the most rewarding things of the work that I've been able to do, is being able to meet and work with some amazing people who are mission driven and who really, I think it's fair to say, embody global citizenship and how they live and what they do. And last week we heard from two of my friends and colleagues, Michael and Tara. And now this week we're going to hear from three more such Notre Dame alumni, but these three individuals are actually living and working abroad. So this morning we've got folks coming in from Quito, Ecuador, Mexico City, and Nairobi, Kenya. And hopefully the technology will enable us to actually complete this program without a technological hiccup. Today we're joined by Brian Brisson, class of '85, recently retired Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs with the Embassy of the United States in Mexico. Kagwiria Mbogori, class of '97 from the law school, a human rights advocate and former chairperson of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And Dr. David Gaus, class of '84, founder and CEO of the Andean Health and Development. I'd like to welcome each and all of you back to Notre Dame, albeit virtually, and rejoining the Notre Dame community. Brian, let me just start with you to get us warmed up. You've just retired from a very distinguished diplomatic career with the U.S. Department of Commerce, serving in a variety of roles across Latin America, representing U.S. trade and commercial interests. First, let me congratulate you on your service to our nation. I think you would agree that you have served in Latin America during a period of extraordinary growth and change and witnessed firsthand the impact of globalization on the region. I think it would be great if you could share with our Notre Dame colleagues a little bit about your background, your experiences at Notre Dame, and how those experiences may have contributed to the perspective that you brought to your work as a diplomat working in Latin America over these last decades.
Well, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ray, and good morning to everybody. Glad to be here today. What I would say is that, when I studied at Notre Dame, I was there 1981 to 1985. And at the time, the Kellogg Institute was a new institute at the university, and its focus was on international affairs, but had a strong focus on Latin America. We had a wonderful priests like Father Ernie Bartel and Claude Parmerlot that were running the institute back then. And so I enrolled, in addition to my coursework in government and international affairs at the university, I enrolled in the Latin American Studies program at the university, where I had wonderful time working with, like, Lou Nanny was just the year before me in the program. And really, Notre Dame helped me to really get a good understanding, and it was a development focused approach to Latin America. It wasn't really an international relations focus of Latin America. And so having that sort of foundation, which was rooted in the Catholic traditions of Notre Dame, I could hardly wait to go abroad and start working and doing something interesting. And at the time, I got some internships with the State Department and worked in Mexico and in Washington. And then the Commerce Department needed somebody to work on Mexico. And so I joined the Commerce Department. And what I discovered was I was very happy and comfortable there, because trade and business is really at the root of economic development and globalization in the region. And I felt that I was able to play a meaningful role in contributing to that in the region by working for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so during the next 33 years, I spent my time working mostly always in Latin America or Washington. And I've had the great pleasure of working 10 years in Mexico and 9 years in Brazil, and the rest of the time in Central America, Argentina, and had a really great opportunity to see globalization firsthand taking place in the region. I think the first takeaway for me is globalization and being a global citizen isn't really a choice. It's something that's happening, and you're part of the process. You choose to be as active or as big a part of the process as you are. But globalization is really not something that people elect to do. It's something that's there, and you're part of it. And so, as I saw, like looking at Mexico, I started my career in Mexico in 1986, 87, and then just retired 8 weeks ago. And Mexico has just changed dramatically. I mean, when I started working on trade with Mexico, our two-way trade was $29 billion in 1987. When I left 8 weeks ago, it was $678 billion. So in that 33-year period, the expansion in trade and investment between our two countries was really meteoric. And I don't think people realize the importance of that relationship. Mexico is essentially now our #1 business partner in the world. And, and really one of the most important components in America's global competitiveness. And so Mexico is an essential part. And I think we saw that when the president talked about getting rid of NAFTA, and then there were talk about, well, should we negotiate a new agreement? And we settled on negotiating the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. And you saw many people who had never spoken out in support of NAFTA during its 25-year history, all of a sudden having to choose to get off the fence and support it, because it really was extremely important to the success of the economic life of their states and communities. And so I thought that was a very interesting thing to see. There was a senator from one of the Midwestern states who I really remember, he had no idea that his state exported $1 billion worth of agricultural products to Mexico. Never knew that. And once this process began, he realized globalization was really something that was at the fabric of the economic and social success of his own community. So Latin America and Mexico was really part of his own community success, and not some faraway land that you just read about in the newspaper when there's a hurricane or some other issue.
Brian, so let me come back to you on some of these issues in a moment, but I want to get some of our other speakers in. I think one of the important takeaways, I think, from your comments, though, particularly, is the importance of the Keough Institute to creating literally generations of Latin Americanists through Notre Dame. I mean, it was really, and I think still is, one of the premier Latin American study centers in the United States now part of the Keough School, which I think is giving a new life and even a new mandate. Let me turn for a moment to Kagwiria. Kagwiria, you're a lawyer who came to Notre Dame very intentionally to get a degree in international human rights law. You then returned to your home in Kenya and devoted yourself to fighting for human rights in quite a number of diverse roles across the region, both within your own government and actually with UN agencies. We'd love to hear you share a little bit about perhaps your background, your experience at Notre Dame, and how it prepared you for the various roles you've been playing, both in the multilateral system as well as within your own government.
Thank you very much. Yes, when I came to Notre Dame in 1996, I already had my bachelor's degree in law from the University of Nairobi, and I was an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And I came to pursue a master's degree in law in international human rights law at the Center for Civil and Human Rights in the law school in Notre Dame. Now, getting that opportunity itself was was a godsend. I had prayed about it for some time. I trusted God, and I do feel that the fact that God opened for me an opportunity to come to Notre Dame and not any other university in the US, because I think if I'd been offered another place, I'd just have jumped at it at the time. The fact that God ordered my steps to Notre Dame, I felt very strongly that it was in answer to prayer. And Psalms 37:23 says that God orders the steps of the righteous man or righteous woman. So I do feel that it is by purpose that I came there. Now, I had grown up in Kenya, gone to school in Kenya all my days, and that was the second time I was stepping on American soil. But coming to Notre Dame really felt like a homecoming. And it was very uncanny or inexplicable for an African young woman coming to South Bend for the first time and feeling very much at where I felt as if I was really coming home. But maybe it also had to do with the fact that most of my education was in a Catholic institutions, so there was a bit of an air of that was eerily familiar. Before I came to Notre Dame, I had put in quite a number of hours as a program officer in the Federation of Women Lawyers, which is the Federation of Women Lawyers in Kenya, as a program officer, running a legal aid clinic for indigent women. And it was very soon after the 1993 International Human Rights Conference in Vienna, and there was a lot of buzz in the air. The human rights civil society sector in the country was burgeoning, and I joined at that level. And I was privileged to run the first gender-based violence or violence against women program in the country with the Federation of Women Lawyers. I was extremely tired because it is a very taxing job. And coming to Notre Dame gave me a respite and a time to even just stop, think, envision my future. And I would say that my best memory of Notre Dame is going to that beautiful, beautiful cathedral and just sitting there in quiet solitude, and almost I felt as if I was gathering myself. And that is one of the things I think is very important for those of us who seek to work for the public and in public service, that taking time to take care of ourselves and our and regain our energies is very important. Apart from leaving Notre Dame with a degree in a specialization in international human rights law, I feel that the time I spent there gave me confidence to come back to Kenya. And I did come back to Kenya promptly a few days after graduation. The sense, the urgency of coming back to my country was very, very real and palpable. So I did not dilly-dally in the US. I came right back. And as a result of the expertise that I gained from the qualifications I got from Notre Dame, this really catapulted me to leadership in human rights issues in my country.
Thank you so much, Kagwiria. And we want to come back a little bit to some of the more concrete experiences that you've had in some of the countries around the region. So, David, perhaps you've had quite an interesting story. You came to Notre Dame and got a degree in accounting in the Mendoza School, and now you're a doctor, running a hospital for the poor in Ecuador named after Father Hesburgh. I know while our time is actually limited, I think our viewers would really enjoy hearing some of the more fascinating details of the journey, how you sort of took literally a right or left turn from accounting to medicine and to begin your work on the poor and become a founder of literally 2 hospitals and a teaching hospital in Ecuador, where you now live. So if you could sort of share a bit of that exciting journey with us, I think people will find it really, really quite interesting.
Thank you, Ray, and good morning. You're right, I was an accounting major at Notre Dame, but I would add that I was a profoundly disturbed accounting major. So much so that the summer after my junior year back in Milwaukee, I contemplated the priesthood on the one extreme and becoming a fighter pilot in the Navy on the other extreme. Ultimately, that ended up becoming coming back to Notre Dame my senior year, and thanks to a number of friendships that I had at Notre Dame, I became interested in doing work in doing volunteer service work. I grew interested in the role of the Catholic Church in Latin American culture and studied liberation theology. And actually had the chance to meet with Father Ted right before leaving for Ecuador to work in a family development project. I stayed in touch with Father Ted while in Ecuador, sent him a number of letters over the course of the 2 years that I was there, and shared my dream to become a physician. Father Ted brought me back to Notre Dame for those 2 years to do my pre-med, and along the way introduced me to Ann Landers, who was instrumental in convincing Bristol Myers Squibb to give me a scholarship to pay for medical school so that I could get back to Ecuador as soon as possible. That whole journey lasted about 11 years after coming back from Ecuador. And Father Ted was instrumental in all of that. He actually became our founding board chair for our organization, Andean Health and Development, and he put together a wonderful board with myself. He came to Ecuador a few times over the years. Father Ted was a man of many skills, but one of the ones that I had not seen until he came to Ecuador was the way he could manage, if not manipulate, heads of state. Truly a magician in that setting. He helped us negotiate contracts with the Ministry of Health and with the President of Ecuador, and spent the next 20 years making our organization what it is today, which is essentially a healthcare project in rural Ecuador that attempts to create financially self-sustainable healthcare services based on local financing mechanisms in Ecuador. As you mentioned, Ray, we've got 2 hospitals and clinics. We train Ecuadorian physicians with a partnership with the Catholic University in Quito. We have partnerships with the government, the Ministry of Health. We write medical manuals. We have a scientific journal and a number of other things. And so ultimately what I would say is that Notre Dame helped me find my passion and validated that passion for me.
Great, thank you, David. And we'll want to learn a little bit more about that in a moment. But Kagwiria, I want to circle back to you for just a moment and pick up a little bit on some of the things you were talking about as you kind of really got momentum in your career as a senior professional in the human rights field. You've taken on some pretty exciting and challenging roles, I'd have to say, within the United Nations and your own country in promoting and defending human rights. And having been around the human rights community myself for a long time, I know this work could not have been, easy, particularly in settings like, the new nation of South Sudan. Can you give us a sense of some of the challenges you faced being a champion for human rights in East Africa over the past several decades?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as I said that soon after coming back from Notre Dame, I came back a very confident woman, and I was quite clear in terms of what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I think I was really re-inspired to serve my people in different capacities. And when I came back, I got a job as the executive director of the Kenya section of the International Commission of Jurists, which at the time was one of the leading human rights institutions in our country. And I served in that capacity for over 5 years. That was tough because at the time, I think civil society organizations were not as well established as they are now. And even sustainability and issue of funding was always an issue. And therefore it was a constant challenge. But my work then involved a lot working with the judiciary of Kenya, and also being one of the civil society organizations that monitored the work of the judiciary and spoke out a lot about democratization and the need for constitutional review, and also access to justice issues. After I finished with when I left the Commission of Jurists, I joined in 2004, I joined the UN system, and I was the first country program manager, UNIFEM program manager in Liberia, and I went to establish the presence of that particular agency in Liberia. It was very tough. It was immediately after the civil war. It was less than a year when I got there. I think it was less than a year after the cessation of hostilities and the signing of the comprehensive peace agreement in Liberia. But things were very interesting in Monrovia at the time because we still had curfew and insecurity in many parts of the country, etc., etc. I continued to serve in Liberia for almost a decade, actually in various capacities. As I later joined the Human Rights and Protection section of the UN peacekeeping mission in Liberia, and later on I joined the judiciary and the judicial support services division of the same mission. And lastly, as you said correctly, I did join the UNDP in South Sudan, based in Juba, to support as a technical advisor for the judiciary of South Sudan. All these places are in my region, in my African region, but very different from home because all these countries were emerging from conflict, and some of them, like Sudan, was still embroiled in conflict. And what is very urgent is the services you provide in this context is that everything is urgent, and the human suffering is unparalleled. And as a human being, it is very moving, and that sense of urgency, you go to sleep thinking about it, and you wake up thinking about it, because human suffering is very difficult to be indifferent to. So essentially, these are the kind of things I have been doing. And in 2014, I was appointed by the president of my country to head to be the chairperson of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which I have done until this year. And just as the pandemic was taking off is when I served my last days. So yes, I'm still in Nairobi. Yeah.
Thank you, Kagwiria. Human rights work is courageous work, and I think a lot of what institutions we take for granted that protect our rights are ones that are desperately in need of being sort of put in place in many of these countries where you have been working. So I want to thank you for that. A lot of that courageous work you've been doing over these many years. Brian, I want to come back to you and pick up on your comments about the U.S.-Mexican relationship and trade and globalization. Obviously, you've been focusing on trade and globalization pretty much through all of your career. I want to just ask, maybe as to you as a Latin American, how is what you have witnessed in terms of the globalization of markets transformed the economy, societies, and commercial relations of Latin American nations where you serve? What have you sort of seen from good to today in terms of what globalization is, the sort of balance sheet on globalization, good, bad, indifferent? What's the good news and perhaps the challenging questions that are related to the integration of all these markets?
Well, I think that obviously there's been a dramatic increase in economic development throughout the region, though, as you know very well from your work at Oxfam, it has not been equal across the board, nor has it been distributed as widely as perhaps it should have been. But nonetheless, we've seen a region that's experienced massive growth and development. And some of the things that I've really seen in the region that I would point to is the insertion of Latin America in global supply chains. Not only Mexico, but Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, many countries have become very important components of global supply chains. And even the Central American countries and what we would call textiles and apparel, they are part of global supply chains in their sector as well. And so I think that we've seen that while it hasn't been always fully positive, it has been a steady march towards some advancement that has benefited people. I mean, I lived in Brazil during the time of Lula, and obviously he pulled 32 million people out of poverty during that period of time, which was a remarkable period of time in which to work in a country like Brazil. But in Mexico, like when I left here, Mexico was a much more provincial place in 1994 when I moved to Central America than it is today. And now you see the largest bread company in the world is a Mexican company, the Bimbo company. The largest long distance carrier in Brazil is a Mexican company. The largest producer of disc brakes in the world is a totally Mexican company, tier one supplier to the automotive industry. So we have seen a real growth. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that looking especially at Mexico, when I lived here the first time, most of the young people you met that were studying in university were dreaming about international relations and law. Those were the two areas that they were most interested in working. And today, most of the people that you meet are interested in information technology and engineering. And now Mexico graduates more engineers every year than Germany does. So I think it's really impressive how there has been this transformation. Innovation is starting to come out of the region. Argentina has an institute that's developed nuclear reactors for Australia. There's just been a lot of growth, and it's been exciting, but there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of need to spread the wealth to a broader range of people.
Great, thank you, Brian. So we have about 10 or 12 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is maybe open things up a bit and maybe just pose kind of a general question that we can all of us can sort of pitch in on. Each of you, I think it's fair to say, looks at today's world from a very different vantage point, geographically and thematically. And each of you has seen considerable change in the countries and regions where you live and work. And you've seen the power, I think, as Brian just said, of globalization sweep across these regions and change them in rather fundamental ways. I'd like to ask maybe each of you to reflect a bit on what you've seen and what gives you hope and what gives you concern about the coming decade, and what we should all pay attention to as global citizens as we look forward. And so, David, maybe let's start with you, and let's try to be brief so we can have a little bit of give and take on these reflections. And Kagwiria and Brian, please jump in when the spirit moves you. Okay. David, can you jump in? And are you on mute?
I just got unmuted. Thanks. For me, I think thinking about this question, I think to sum it up, my take on this is to know thyself. I think the Industrial Revolution and globalization have, in a way, homogenized the human experience. And some might say, well, that's crazy. That's absurd. What does a person from rural Zaire have in common with New York City? But 500 years ago, the world was quite a different place. My concern along the way is that the governments and the market basically hold the power and control technology. And if they retain that power, I think we'll be told how to think and how to act. And so knowing thyself is critical. Ecuadorian intellectuals still feel that Ecuador is a colony and has very little self-identity. My hope is that since World War II, we have had a period of relative peace. Now, I don't know if this is coincidental or causal, but I think that would be my concern, and that would be my hope.
Great. Kagwiria, do you want to jump in and share of some insights or reflections on how you see the East Africa region or Africa more generally today in the face of sort of globalization and how it's impacting it? In your particular case, you have a lot of new players, and China particularly and India now are major players in the African continent, and along with the United States and the European Union.
I don't know. Maybe what I'd like to say is that now everything has been compounded by the COVID pandemic. And the uncertainty, what we have right now actually is like uncertainty. There's been a lot of development projects funded by China, but I think a lot of citizens in my region are worried about the impact of being so indebted to China through grants and through especially infrastructural kind of grants. But we are grateful for better roads. Some of the biggest challenges we still have in my part of the world is grant corruption and problem and the complexities of problems, let me say, that confound us in terms of the unchecked corruption and how much of funds is really going to development and other issues. In light of the COVID situation and the lockdowns and also, as I said before, the uncertainty wrought by that, I'm looking at the retrogression of gains that had already been made towards achievement of the MDGs and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm seeing that with or without global cooperation in our region, the poverty index has just been rising through these last couple of months. Hunger is more a certainty now than a rumor. Health, although the Africa region and our country in particular has not been as devastated and hard hit by COVID as some of your countries, and the news is full of news about the number of cases in America, etc. But we definitely, I feel that the long-term impacts will impact on on education. A lot in Kenya, schools are still closed, and they have been closed since March. So we are going to have a backlog of children maybe repeating classes, and it is a bit of it's a mess. Gender inequality and women's empowerment. Through this time, we have seen rising numbers of violence against women and girls, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, violence against children, sexual violence, all sorts of violence within the home, especially where it is supposed to be safe, is where some of, especially young women and children, are not safe. So I'm looking at the efforts at reducing inequality as envisioned in the Sustainable Development Goal number 10, peace and justice. All these are going to be highly impacted. And although these are global commitments by countries, by governments all over the world, the steps and the gains that had been made so far are likely to retrogress or stall or just be unfunded. Yeah. But what is most worrying for me is the poverty index will rise, not just in our country, not just within our region, but even in your own countries. This is going to rise, and you might see more homelessness of people. So it's essentially, I think, these are the trends which I'm seeing that we should look out for, and they're going to affect us, and they're going to affect every country.
Thank you, Kagwiria. One of the things I think is on the exciting side in Kenya as a leader in Africa is the use of internet technology that came with globalization, and the extent to which Kenya has been an innovator in that area with your cash-free banking system and the use of it for education. So on the upside, I think there's that bit of good news, which maybe hopefully will help in the education and sort of economic sector a bit to alleviate some of the issues that you're raising. So Brian, why don't you come in with some comments? But maybe look a little bit beyond the sort of economic growth question to some of the other deeper issues in Latin America that maybe connect with some of what Kagwiria and David were referring to.
I think that obviously, one of the positive things is I think technology offers a great opportunity to help people to become more anchored into the global economy and take advantage of its benefits. Clearly, financial inclusion, for example, can be achieved much more easily through information technology than through building bank branches around the country. And people need financial inclusion in order to be able to build their small businesses and advance in their lives. I think, the region corruption, as Kagwiria mentioned, I think is one of the most important issues that's out there, because corruption erodes people's confidence in institutions, and it sucks money out of the system that was meant for the benefit of citizens to the benefit of a very small cabal of people that are illegal. And I think that leads to a lot of difficulties in these countries. So I really think that, the technology is going to allow, I see in Latin America, the fact that the availability of technology is helping to increase transparency in government. It's also serving to make people more and better informed, give people greater access to information and to services. And so I think that the bright spot is that technology is advancing rapidly, and they're able to leapfrog some technologies as they go forward. I laugh now because you just go to even to a shoe shiner, and the first thing he could do is say, "Oh, your president just said this 2 minutes ago. What do you think?" And, it used to be that if people had no information, or it took days in order to go. So I think that there's a lot of good out there. My big concern probably is that the U.S. needs to stay engaged. And sometimes I feel like we're reluctant to stay engaged as aggressively as we have in the post-war period, which has been so important to our own success as well as to advancement in the world. And so I think, but the good news is organizations like Notre Dame are becoming more globally engaged themselves. And so you could say organizations like the one you led and Notre Dame are in some ways picking up some of the slack from governments in the process of connecting people globally for positive benefit. And so like Notre Dame's opening global gateways in Brazil and Mexico. I'm sure they have them in other parts of the world. And so I'm given hope by the fact that there are organizations besides government that are actively engaged in globalization and communication.
Thanks, Brian. I think one of the things that is interesting about the Keough School, and particularly about your history with Keough, and I think also the Kroc Institute, which is been focused on peace studies here at the university, is a very strong focus on some of these issues, on poverty, on human rights, on good governance, on transparency, all of the things that are in some sense are going to be antidotes to building civil society, effective states, and inclusive markets. I think in the spirit that I think you were characterizing. At this point, what I want to do is invite all of you to actually put forward some of your questions, so we can kind of open it up to the panelists and hear a bit from you. We invite you to fill out the form that you see in the chat function to submit questions that we showed you at the beginning of the broadcast today. In the meantime, I'm going to start with a question or two, and I'm going to just start with one that I think probably all of our guests could probably speak to in one way or another, and have, I think, maybe in their remarks so far. One person asks, as a young professional who looks to the panelists and their inspiring careers and work, I'm wondering if either of you or any of you could have any advice on how early in one's career we should try to find a specific focus or speciality within a field of sustainable development. Anybody want to take that? I think that could apply to any field, particularly whether it's medicine or anything else. In other words, how early does one have to really be thinking about those, discerning that choice that's going to take you where each of you have gone? And David, maybe you might jump in on that one, since your whole process of discernment, in some sense began while you were at Notre Dame. And I think, Brian, you talked a little bit about Keough. Maybe each of you could kind of comment on what would you advise a student, and how intensely do they have to feel, that they need to make a decision that's going to, get them on the right path?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and something that I've thought about a lot over the years, Ray. I think that I always juxtapose it to public accounting. When I was a senior, you could just walk into an interview on campus and get a job, whereas in development work, it never works that way. It takes a long time in a process of discernment. And I think it's trying to find a passion, and I think it's understanding that the world that we create here in the United States is oftentimes, culturally, it's a world of trying to mitigate uncertainty. But I think embracing uncertainty is a key component to helping figure out what your passion is and what your vocation is. And then not make a blind leap of faith, but make a calculated leap of faith as you pursue it. it's hard to drill down any more than that philosophically. I just think it's knowing yourself and knowing there's a great degree of uncertainty out in the world, and you just have to find out what you love and go from there, and understand that it's not an easy, it's not a well-defined easy pathway. All of us are working in development work, and the three of us couldn't be any different in terms of how we landed where we landed.
Brian Kagwiria, do you want to come in on that question at all?
Yes, I'd like to say that one of the things that I love most about Notre Dame is that it is a place where I felt that I had all the freedoms to express my Christian faith, and that therefore I can only really talk about service which is based on something deeper than self, and that is service to God and service to fellow man. And I believe this is grounded in a faith in a God who is almighty and who is worth of our service. And that therefore the best place to begin is through prayer and seeking God's face and seeking God's guidance. And when God calls you, the call is there. There's an urgency that you feel of walking towards the direction that you have been called. And I would really like to emphasize that as people of faith, we must not forget, yes, as I said before, that that God orders the steps of a righteous man. He orders the steps of a righteous woman. And these are not my words, they're the words in the scriptures.
I think it helps us distinguish between a career and a vocation. And I often find that those of us who are in mission-based organizations end up feeling like we've chosen a vocation as much as we've chosen a career. Brian, do you want to opine on this issue at all from your vantage point?
Sure. I think the thing that I would say is that, it's never too early to start. You need to really get started as soon as you possibly can, but it doesn't matter at what point you are. You always have skills and experiences that can be brought to bear. I think the important thing to recognize is that we all have an opportunity, regardless of what we do, to contribute to sustainable development of the societies in which we live in through the actions we take, with the positions that we have and the resources that we bring to the table. But I think, as you mentioned about vocations, Ray, I think that the people that I've seen that have been most successful in international are the people that really do view it as a vocation. I try to tell people when you join the Ford service, like I've been in for the last 33 years, this is not a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job. It's really something that you have to throw yourself.
Well, I think we lost your sound there. We lost
your
Brian.
efforts.
Oh, okay.
And so I would just say that start now. And the fact that so many of the young people have opportunities to do internships, it's a great way for people to explore their passions.
Great. Well, I think we have time for one more question. And I'm going to throw it out there to each of you, and because each of you are sitting in different parts of the world and seeing this question from a different vantage point. It's really about migration, and migration is one of the great contemporary issues, and we see the impacts of it on our southern border and our political discourse in the United States. But in Africa, we see climate-induced migration. In South America, we're seeing politically induced migration. I wonder if each of you might comment a little bit on how you sort of see the migration issue. And I think, Brian, you actually saw the sort of some of the Central American push factors, perhaps when you were in that region, why people were leaving and moving to the north. And perhaps in the case of Kagwiria, you're seeing some of the political as well as sort of environmental factors that are pushing people, to migrate in the region and beyond. I wonder if we just have a brief conversation about migration and how you see that unfolding in the next 10 years or so. Brian, I'm not sure I can hear you.
Well, I would just say, I think that migration on balance has been one of the most important factors in globalization, economic development. It's obviously been going on for a long time. United States, 15% of our population is foreign born. in Latin America, Brazil and Mexico. Brazil and Argentina have about 5% each in foreign born, but there's still so much opportunity in immigration from the receiving countries. And from the countries where there are problems, immigration clearly is an unfortunate phenomenon. But I think that the unfortunate thing has been that immigration has taken on, especially in our own country, sort of a negative connotation in recent years, when in fact immigration has contributed so much to the United States and has been such an important factor for us. And so, I just hope that we can find a way towards being more compassionate, more open to immigration, and working in the dual prong approach of trying to resolve the problems in countries where immigration is starting, but also finding ways to welcome and embrace the immigrants that do show up. I walk past a sign every day on the street here in Mexico City which says immigration is a human right. And it always makes me smile as I walk past that. And I just hope that we can find our way towards a more positive time. I remember when I started my career, we were having the Mariel boat left. And back at that time, the reaction to the refugees was far different then than it is today, in terms of people going out in their boats to pick up the refugees as opposed to building a wall.
So Kagwiria, do you have you want to offer an Africa perspective on the migration question?
Absolutely. Actually, in our commission, we ran a program on migrant rights, and looking at migration from our part of the world, and in light of the implementation of the International Compact on Migration. And the factors driving, or the determinants driving migration from not just Kenya, but other African countries to Europe and other places, including America, is sometimes it's just conflict, wars, or displacement of populations, natural disasters, climate changes, and inability for people to sustain livelihoods. Political persecution also is a factor, but the biggest factor is the economic factors. People leaving to seek better employment, better livelihoods, and all such macroeconomic determinants are the biggest driving factors of persons leaving the continent to look for something better. And I just when we are talking about this, I try and put myself in those shoes, and I say, by the time someone is trying to cross the Mediterranean in something almost like a floating piece of wood, just so that they can get to the shores of Europe, how desperate do you think they are? They are so essentially there's something driving migration all over the world, including migrant labor, and a lot of countries are also inviting migrant labor. And there's a whole conversation on the rights of migrants, which I don't think we have the time to do right now. But essentially, these are the factors that are driving that drive migration.
Thank you, Kagwiria. Yeah, and I think that I think as we go into the future, this question of climate-induced migration, just rising temperatures in the tropical and subtropical region, are great. Are going to sort of drive people from the region, simply because the temperatures will make it uninhabitable. And so I think this is one of the reasons why, no matter where you stand on this climate issue, it's not really a partisan or political issue. It's going to affect livelihoods. It's going to affect political stability and derive conflict, and it's going to drive migration. So in some ways, we need to think of that as not just a climate issue and not just about fossil fuels versus renewable energy. It's really about sort of it's an existential question about the planet and the security of livelihoods across the planet. We're coming to the close of the hour, so I want to sadly I'm going to have to bring our session to a close. I want to thank, first of all, Kagwiria, Brian, and David for joining us today from Nairobi, Mexico City, and Quito, Ecuador. We're really very, very grateful to each and every one of you for making time to share your experience as domers in the world, if I can put it that way. And I know everyone has really enjoyed learning about your lives and work. Each of you has a really fascinating story, and I wish we had a lot more time to really give folks even a richer and deeper exposure to you and your work. I also want to take a moment to plug the work that David is doing among the poor communities in Ecuador through the Andean Health and Development Program, through the Hesburgh Hospital. And anyone who might want to learn more about that work can find information at David's website for the at www.andeanhealth.org. So if you want to, we'll look into that, check it out. And as this is the last session in our three-part series, I also want to effusively thank Dolly Duffy and Mary Scott from the Alumni Affairs for their work and that of their team to bring us all together for these sessions. And I also want to thank all of you who've been loyally attending each of these sessions over the last 3 weeks. So thanks again to all of you for joining us today. On ThinkND, we have many different resources to help you explore many of the concepts that we've been discussing over the last several weeks. So be sure to see that as a resource and check those resources out. Next week, we're going to take a break, but we're going to resume the following week exploring where we're going with a focus on sports. Quite a shift from where we are here. Chris Stevens, assistant teaching professor in the Mendoza College of Business, and I think a former basketball player, if I'm not mistaken, and founding co-director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative, will be the moderator for that theme. So please feel free to share this series with your friends. We'd like to have many more alumni join us, so spread the word. We're accepting registrations throughout the entire program as each meeting can stand alone. So again, thank you all. Thanks to our guests and best wishes, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.